everyone and welcome back. In this video we will be reading another chapter of Christopher Robin by Disney. Chapter 7. There was, however, just one problem with Christopher's plan to return to the 100-acre wood, and that problem was the green door inside the hollowed-out tree. For while the green door was the same green door it had been when Christopher last used it, Christopher was not the same. He was no longer a thin little boy with narrow shoulders and hips. He was a grown man with broad shoulders and a bit of a belly, which was why he now found himself stuck quite firmly in the middle of the door. His bottom half was on one side and his top half was on the other. He couldn't help thinking, a position Pooh had often found himself in. Pooh, who had gone through the green door first, turned and eyed his friend. He took in Christopher's top half and peered around to see where his bottom half was. Nothing, noting it was missing. He cocked his head. "Are you stuck?" he asked. "Apparently I am," Christopher said, his voice strained as the door squeezed his sides painfully. "Happens to me all the time," Pooh said with a shrug. "Did you just eat honey?" Christopher shook his head. "No, I did not just eat honey." Taking a deep breath, he braced his arms back against the tree and pushed hard. He didn't budge. He took another breath and pushed again. Still, he did not budge. Finally, sucking it as hard as he could, Christopher pushed one final time. With a pop, his body came loose of the doorway and he tumbled to his freedom. He straightened up, stretching his arms toward the sky and then wincing. He was going to have some bruises. Bringing his hand to his head, he felt the hair sticking up and knew, without need to look in a mirror, that he was in a rather disheveled state. He sighed. At least he knew the chances of running into anyone from work here were non-existent. Distracted by his escape from the door, Christopher hadn't taken a moment yet to look around the woods. But now he did, and he was shocked by what he saw. Thick fog covered everything, and he shuddered as a chill swept over him. This was not the idyllic 100-acre wood he remembered. "Pooh?" he asked, turning to look at the bear. "Was it always this gloomy?" "Yes," Pooh answered. Then he paused. "Or no, I forgot which." Christopher narrowed his eyes. He was rather certain that this was not how things had always been. He knew, in fact, that when he had come to the 100-acre wood as a child, it was never gloomy, and only rarely even rained. Since it hadn't always been like this, when had it changed? And why? A piece of him knew the answer but refused to acknowledge it. Instead, he returned his attention to the reason he was there now. "Well," he asked Pooh, "which way?" "I was hoping you would know," Pooh answered. Christopher shook his head. "I haven't been here in years," he pointed out. "How would I know?" "Because you're Christopher Robin." Pooh's response was so simple and so direct that Christopher couldn't even come up with a retort. The bear was looking up at him with complete trust. He didn't have any doubts that somehow Christopher would save the day. Looking at the bear looking at him, Christopher wished with sudden ferocity that he could have such faith in himself. "Right," he said, putting on a brave face. "Yes, well, we need to follow this systematically." Pooh, however, was only half listening. His attention had been caught by a bee that chose that moment to buzz by. "Follow this simple honeybee." "Yes." He began to wander off after the bee. Pulling back, Christopher shook his head. "No, Pooh, the key is to head in one direction, so as not to get lost." He gestured to the woods around them, especially in a fog like this. He tried to peer through the thick mist in the hopes of seeing a path or a sign. Unfortunately, the fog had made everything take on the same ghostly and blurry appearance. There was no way to tell which way was which, not without some form of help. Luckily, Christopher was always prepared. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small round brass object. It was his compass. From the war, he explained to Pooh, when the bear asked what it was and why he had it. "I still keep it with me." He moved it between his fingers in a rhythmic and practiced motion. The metal felt cool to the touch. The cover of the compass dinged and worn. "What is a war?" Pooh asked. It's something we won't speak of, Christopher answered, leaving no room for discussion. Just then, a clap of thunder echoed through the woods. Pooh looked down at his belly. It would seem I am hungrier than I have ever been before. Pleased to have a distraction, even one as unpleasant as thunder, Christopher looked up at the darkening sky. It seems the weather is getting worse, he said. Glancing back down at the compass, he watched the needle wobble. He wasn't sure what direction they were supposed to be going, but he figured that if they went north and kept going in that direction, they couldn't get too terribly lost. Unfortunately, while Christopher was staring at the compass, Pooh had been staring at him, at the compass contraption. It was the same color as honey, so he instantly liked it. Plus, Christopher had said it would help them get where they were going, something he also liked. The only problem he could see was that Christopher didn't seem ready to use it. So he decided, after waddling over to his friend, he would just have to do it. May I see the compass? Pooh asked, holding out his paw. Startled, Christopher handed it over. Immediately he regretted his actions. Pooh began to walk away, compass in hand. No, wait, Christopher shouted. You must keep us north, north. The words echoed back at him through the fog. Already Pooh was disappearing from view. I'll follow the very handy arrow, Pooh shouted back over his shoulder. Christopher let out a sigh. He had no choice but to follow Pooh, whatever direction that happened to be. Pooh was gay worried. They had been walking for what felt like hours and hours, and they still hadn't seen any sign of his friends. They hadn't seen much, actually, except for pervading fog. To help pass the time, Pooh had begun to play a little game as they walked. He tried to see shapes in the fog, the same way he would when he lay on his back and looked up at the clouds in the sky. So far, he had made a pot of honey and a honeybee, and some honeycombs. Does anything look familiar? Christopher's question startled Pooh. He was tempted to ask if Christopher meant the pot of honey Pooh currently saw floating there beside Christopher's head, but he decided against it. The fog, he said instead. Besides the fog, Christopher said, his tone impatient. Just then, out of the fog emerged something other than fog. Unfortunately, it was not something that Pooh was happy to see. It was a sign, and written on the sign in childish handwriting were those words, Beware of Huffalumps and Woozles. Oh, bother, Pooh said, stopping short, leading Christopher to bump right into him. What's the matter? Christopher asked, but upon peering around the bear to see cause of his sudden stopping, he saw the sign. Recognizing the handwriting and the warning, he groaned. You can't be serious. There are no such thing as Huffalumps and Woozles. Pooh pointed at the warning. Of course there are, he said. Didn't you see the sign? Terrifying elephants and weasel-like beasts who wander the world to prey on happiness aren't real, Pooh, Christopher said. Now come on. Pushing past the bear, Christopher walked right past the sign and continued on his way. Watching him go, Pooh hesitated. He trusted Christopher Robin, he always had, but it had been Christopher Robin who'd helped paint the sign in the first place. So what was he to do? I shall continue to do nothing different, Pooh decided, for that is the best something to do. With his mind made up, he resumed walking. Christopher Robin, he said as they made their way through still more fog. What is your work? He wasn't entirely sure what work was, but Christopher mentioned it often enough that Pooh figured it was important. I'm an efficiency manager at a luggage company, Christopher answered. Pooh nodded, though the words meant little to him. Do you have many friends there? I have people who rely on me, Christopher answered, turning. He looked back at Pooh, curious why the bear was suddenly so interested in his life outside the 100-acre wood. So yes, Pooh said. He looked so pleased to think that Christopher had friends that the man suddenly found himself over-explaining himself and his role. No, he said, shaking his head. I don't think of them as friends. It only makes it harder if I have to let some of them go. Pooh cocked his head. Where will they go? He asked, confusion written all over his innocent face and in his response. I don't know, Pooh, Christopher said. I don't know. He swung his hand through the thick fog as though trying to hit it. He didn't know. He had absolutely no idea what would happen to all the people who who he had crossed off lists to make that magical 20% cut. He didn't know what would happen to their families. He didn't know if they would find other work. He had no idea about any of them, and up until now, he had been able to push the horrible, racking guilt out of his mind. But now Pooh was making him see what he would truly be doing. "Did you let me go?" The bear's question bounced off the fog and echoed in Christopher's head. He had never thought about it, but now look at the bear who still trusted him enough to follow him through the fog and believe his stories about heffalumps and woozles. Christopher came face to face with the realization that he hadn't been the only one to suffer when he went away to school. He had left the 100-acre wood and his friends, and yes, he had ultimately let Pooh go. He had let him go, and the result? He looked around at the gloomy woods. The result was a world gone to pieces. He could only imagine what the world would look like for all the men and women who wouldn't have jobs by the following week's end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. See you next time.